Josh Arnold, one of the most recognised authorities in the field of cost of delay, states that almost all of the methods typically employed for prioritisation in large organisations end up resembling the Eurovision competition. This is essentially prioritisation by politics, horse trading, and to some extent, popularity. The two most popular techniques are LVD, or loudest voice dominates, and HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion. The simple metaphor for cost of delay is opportunity cost. Josh frames it very eloquently as assessing the impact of not having something when you need it. As a typical example, this might be the cost incurred while waiting to deliver a solution that improves efficiency. It's the opportunity cost between having the same thing now or getting it later. Don Reinertsen, who quite literally wrote the book on cost of delay, introduced the concept of weighted shortest job first, usually abbreviated to WSJF because it's quite a mouthful, for prioritisation. If capacity is finite, working on one thing means we're not working on something else. WSJF calculates economic priorities based on the concept that the benefit of giving immediate service to any job is its cost of delay savings, and the cost is the amount of time we block the resources. Both cost and benefit must enter into an economically correct sequencing. Fully quantified cost of delay is useful for a lot more than just prioritisation. In the Principles of Product Development Flow, Don gives example after example, but it's hard. Calculating the revenue or cost savings of every idea we have in dollars per week is tough even before we start trying to factor in non-financial benefits. Don suggests not allowing perfect to be the enemy of better, though. In his words, the other thing to realise about our economic decisions is that we're trying to improve them, not make them perfect. We want to make better economic choices than we make today, and today this bar is set very low. The formula for WSJF is pretty straightforward. In a quantified world, you take the cost of delay per period, e.g. $1,000 a week, and divide it by the duration your capacity will be blocked by this idea from working on other things. The higher the value of the resulting calculation, the higher the economic priority. The good thing about prioritisation is that you're just comparing things. So a proxy arrived at by relative estimation will give you a relative priority. And because value is complex, we consider cost of delay through three lenses: user and business, or direct value; timing criticality and risk reduction and opportunity enablement, or indirect value. For duration, the size in story points also makes a pretty good proxy, as it represents the amount of capacity on our teams it will consume, and thus, to an extent, the time it will take. User and business value tends to represent the classic drivers used in an ROI type calculation. Will we grow revenue, reduce or avoid costs, or improve margin? Through a user lens, we might consider NPS movement or other customer happiness levers. Timing criticality is the tricky one. It's easy to ask yourself the question of how urgent is it, at which point you're basically back in the land of whoever's screaming loudest. You're really asking the question of how sensitive is the value to time? A great example would be retail trading seasons. Getting a feature out in time for the Christmas trading season might be hugely valuable, but if you miss Christmas, the value proposition might be near zero until next year. Finally, we have the indirect value lever. The way you think about risk reduction and opportunity enablement tends to boil down to whether you're a glass half full person or a glass half empty person. Consider an exploratory enabler feature. Opportunity enablement would suggest that the learning will increase the chance you build the right thing, while risk reduction will argue that without the learning, there's a high risk you'll build the wrong thing. You might think of the phrases, if we do this, then we can do that better, faster, or easier, or if we don't do this, just think what will happen. When I first started teaching WSJF, I loved explaining cost of delay in huge detail with lots of graphs and examples and even spreadsheets sometimes. But after a lot of experiments, I realised that whether I gave a 5-minute or a 25-minute introduction didn't matter. The true learning was in the doing. So let's explain the simulation. I wanted a non-technical example, and it was inspired by the 3 months I lived in California when I was a young developer, a little bit over 30 years ago now. I was working in a little town called Temecula, roughly halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego. Every weekend, I drove up to stay with a friend on the beach in LA, and I had the weird experience of seeing towns being built. Property developers were literally creating towns in the desert to offer affordable living in a nice community to people who couldn't afford it in LA and didn't mind a commute. In later years, pre-COVID, the trend evolved to taking small towns near airline hub cities and investing heavily in developing them to attract corporate relocations. In the simulation, you're a property developer expanding out of building aged care homes to developing towns that might one day become cities. You've bought up some farms a couple of hours commute away from the nearest major city, bulldozed them, and are planning to build a satellite city called Safe City. You'll make money by building houses and shops and selling them. Your cash reserves are reasonable but not excessive, so cash flow will be a primary driver. You've identified the first 8 major development opportunities for the city. Your product and marketing team have done enough research to have a view on potential returns, and your construction folks have estimated the effort involved. These opportunities are, of course, epics, and together we'll apply weighted shortest job first, or WSJF, and believe me, you might be starting to recognise where we shorten it to WSJF, to prioritise them. All good cities start with a vision. All good big strategies start with a vision. The vision is this: for enterprises, their employees and supporting ecosystems who desire a cost-effective alternative to offshoring and expensive big city living, the Rural Technology Community Program is an initiative designed to breathe new life into rural areas that establishes rural technology campuses and the essential community living and small business ecosystem to support them. Unlike the communication and time zone challenges of offshoring and the expensive, frantic life in major cities, our solution spurs national technology growth, offers fresh, purpose-built country communities, and extremely cost-effective property for large enterprises, the small businesses who support them, and the people who work there. Your key customers are enterprise IT divisions, small business owners, technology employees, and tree change seekers. Remember that you're not there to build the city and run it. You're going to build it, sell it, and use the profits to fund the next city. Your success measures are profit on properties sold, population growth rate, and the value of properties on the market. This is an example of one of the epics. The name and estimated market value of the idea are present, as is an elevator pitch describing what it is and who it's for. You'll notice space on the bottom of the card to record the results of your cost of delay calculations, and that the size has been pre-filled based on the feedback from your construction teams. There will occasionally be some special notes that appear in red text on the epic, and these may well influence your voting. Size is the effort to build the epic, and it's been pre-estimated. Don't factor it into your cost of delay. You're here to talk about value, not effort. We use relative estimation to work out our cost of delay values. It's a technique you've probably seen your teams use to estimate effort. We're going to use it to estimate value. It's based on 2 key concepts. We can estimate things by comparison more accurately than in isolation, and a theory called the wisdom of the crowd, established by a study, it was the wideband Delphi study years ago, that proved that groups of non-experts could collaboratively produce a better estimate than an individual expert. Because it's relative, we have to start with something to compare to. You all have either physical or virtual voting tools, but we don't use them for the first card. You have to find your one, the least valuable thing. Your first one will be for risk mitigation and opportunity enablement. It will be the thing that wouldn't matter if it never got built. The city could still succeed. You pick this by discussion and debate. Once you have your one, you can start comparing. Vote with your cards or with the Miro mechanics, depending on whether you're in person or virtual. For each new epic, you ask yourself the following question: how valuable is this epic compared to the others that we've scored for the current cost of delay element? Once you've made your decision, cast your vote. Vote first, debate second. Do a simultaneous reveal to make sure that no one person dominates the choice. There's always someone who races to put a card down and say, this is a 5, and everybody else has to choose whether to agree. You want to get in the way of that. If your votes are the same, congratulations. Score it, move on. If they vary, discuss the causes of the high votes and the low votes. Give people a chance to pitch their thinking. Once you've talked a bit, re-vote. See how things have moved. In real life, we'd stick with this until we reach consensus, but for the simulation and the sake of the time vote box, on the second vote, the majority rules. The first thing to do is read all the epics. You can read them to each other, you can pass them around. Take a few minutes to get your heads around the big picture and maybe take some notes. Once everybody's ready, you'll start the process of voting on cost of delay. The best way to do it is to draw a parallel to Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. First, you'll put on your risk reduction and opportunity hat. You'll keep this hat until you've agreed on the score for every epic. Once all the epics have been scored, you'll switch and the risk and opportunity hat comes off, the timing criticality hat comes on. And you vote on timing criticality for all 8 epics, before finally you finish up with the user and business value and pulling out your calculators. Remember that we're voting on value, so avoid the trap of thinking that 1 means highest priority. Remember that 1 means lowest value through this lens, wearing this hat.